This is Andy Gutierrez from StarWars.com, and you are listening to Coffee with Kenobi with Dan Z. This is the podcast you're looking for.
This is James Arnold Taylor, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi. I have a good feeling about this.
Here we are, friends. It is time to talk about the 24th chapter, the 8th episode in Season 3 of The Mandalorian. The episode is titled The Return, and we've got the return of two of your favorite guests and two of my favorite people in this galaxy or any other. First, let's bring in the co-creator of Coffee with Kenobi, Cory Clubb.
Hello. I'm glad to be here for finale wrap-up.
Yes. Looking forward to your thoughts. Also joining us as returning guest. It's been far too long since we've had this esteemed colleague of ours on the airwaves, but he is the host of podcast Stardust, one of the co-hosts, a longtime Star Wars fan and a frequent guest on many podcasts, Mr. Dennis Keithley.
Hey, Dan. Hey, Cory. Really good to be back here on Coffee with Kenobi, and I am super excited to talk about the finale of The Mandalorian.
I am too. Let's talk about the return, and we'll start it out with our one word and overall thoughts, and we'll dive into some of the bigger ideas and events of the episode. Dennis, let's start with you. Your one word and overall thoughts.
Wow, I knew this question was coming all day, and I've been thinking about it, and trying to settle on one word is tough. So I went with epic, and I used that to encompass Arthurian, legendary, Odyssey, the grand scope of this entire story. And it seemed to pull in the best of Star Wars mythology, and was a simply fantastic conclusion to the season.
Wow. Well, great. I'm glad to hear that. Cory, what about you?
I promise you, to the end of the earth, I did not collaborate with Dennis. My one word is also epic.
Wow.
Maybe for other reasons, but I enjoyed this episode. Definitely epic. And all it entails, like you said, this is just a wonderful wrap up of this season, and definitely kudos to the team there, and just in general, this whole, I feel like this is a nice kind of a sunset, if you will, a little bit on this season.
All right, good. I've been doing this one word thing, I don't know, a couple months now, but we've reviewed a lot of Star Wars. We did Willow, Bad Batch, all kinds of things in the world of Star Wars, naturally, because it is Coffee with Kenobi. I have never had a harder time coming up with a word for this episode. Ultimately, the word I would use to describe the return is adequate. It was adequate. It, I really liked it. I had a lot of fun with it. But it also sort of highlighted and underlined for me some challenges I've had with this season, and character direction or lack of character direction. But we'll see. I've only seen it one time at the time of this recording, and I undoubtedly will see it many, many more times until then. But Dennis, you said epic, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Tell me, give me some. Let's break this down in CWK Pour-Over style, where we're just a little more broad and we kind of focus on the things that we really like rather than doing it chronologically. What are some reasons why it was epic to you? Just, feel free to go anywhere in the episode, but what are some things that drew you into this? And did this season work for you overall?
It's funny you should ask that, because I was just contemplating that before I jumped on the microphone here, and I've been hearing that buzz all day about that the season may have been disjointed for a lot of people. And so I started thinking about the season as a whole. I was like, well, I remember really liking episode 1, and I thought episode 2 was pretty cool as well. The third one, where they had to deal with Dr. Pershing, wasn't my favorite. But then I was like, I don't remember anything after that I didn't particularly, that wasn't enjoyable for me. And so I liked the season overall quite a bit. And what I appreciate about this episode, I think, is that it subverted some expectations I had, and it also tied together some things that I thought were loose ends, or they just kind of forgotten about over the course of the season or from previous seasons as well. And, so for instance, the clones in this one, I think they let us go along with this notion that perhaps that was somehow going to be tied into the Rise of Skywalker and what happened with Palpatine, but it was not. It was something completely different. And upon reflection, they spelled it out for us that something different was going on in the prior episode, with Gideon deflecting on the clone question, saying that, that's your obsession, not mine. And so he was hiding something. And so things like that really intrigued me and drew me right into this episode.
Cory?
Yeah, I agree. I was talking to my kids about this afterwards, and they kind of felt like, Dad, this kind of felt like a part 2 of the previous episode. Like they just kind of sliced it in half. And I was like, you know what? You're right. I think that this could have been run together, or part 1, part 2. Feeling it really kind of was. There was no loss of story, and it was picking up where it left off. And I really feel like like you said earlier, Dan, was just kind of just adequate in the sense of like, well, it wrapped up. But I'm taking that previous grade from the previous episode and kind of like pouring it into this one and saying, well, okay, this is all kind of like one big 2-parter. And that's why I feel like coming into this, I was really coming up hot, and I was like, okay, this is great. I feel like this really wrapped up a lot of loose ends, like you said, Dennis, and gave me satisfaction. And I'm like, okay, I feel like this is really coming to a conclusion, but it's also opened a lot of bigger doors for bigger stories to be told. Mandalorians were put in this, Mandalorian's back, and the rise of, oh gosh, I forgot her name. I
Bo-Katan.
Utter blank. Bo-Katan, thank you. The rise of Bo-Katan and her leadership, and she really had a huge arc in this entire series. I think she was the star of the series. And Mandalorian and Grogu were just kind of, I don't say background players, but they were supporting characters. And I think this really was Bo-Katan's season 3 kind of arc, and she had learned a lot, and she'll be moving things forward. I think I'd like to do that, see where she goes. But I think also the point too, I kind of talking about all season as well, like that this is kind of just a lead up. I feel like we're telling a story that's going to get something even bigger. So not that that's a bad thing, but also sometimes it gets a little bit like, okay, where's this all going? What do we learn this entire episode? Originally in the first episode, he was supposed to go bathe in the water, so he got that all done. The first episode, okay, well, what's next? What's going to happen? And so we got this kind of big adventure, but I agree with you, Dennis, in the sense of I never felt like it was a downer necessarily. I never felt like intrigued. There was like little Easter eggs all over the place, some left turns instead of right turns, but nothing was like super crazy Star Wars epic that like shook my fandom. So overall, I think it was a good lead up to something bigger.
Okay, well, let's focus on the things that really, really worked. And you both mentioned epic, so I know you've got an extensive list. I'm gonna start off by saying that the fight sequence where he had to have R5-D4 open up those individual shield doors, within a certain timing, so we could take on 2 of these Dark Trooper 4.0 or whatever they are, without weapons, and then slowly accumulating new weapons. That was masterful. That was so much fun fight choreography. It was really seeing Mando at his best. He's an incredible warrior and savvy. Plus, he's patient with this droid. He's not overreacting. Well, I guess if you're allowed to overreact in that sort of life or death situation, but he handles it so cool. The fighting is cool. Visually, it's stunning. The music is great. That is one of the coolest parts of this episode for me, and I love that.
One of the things I also appreciate about that scene is that the commandos is what the closed captioning was calling those troopers, is that they seem kind of like a mashup of Ralph McQuarrie concept art and the Riot Trooper that we saw on The Force Awakens. And I thought it was kind of a neat little transitional trooper to take us from Return of the Jedi to The Force Awakens. And then I know this came up on last week's review of The Mandalorian with y'all, but just kind of how those shields called back to the Phantom Menace and Qui-Gon Jinn's scene there. I loved that The Mandalorian did get so much action time in this episode, and draw back some of that focus and the limelight from Bo-Katan.
Corey, what's a big
big
sequence for you?
Yeah, you mentioned the hallway fight scene with the Dark Troopers, but I also enjoyed the one where he was being taken away, bound up, the two guards.
Oh, yeah.
He had to escape that. And that was another great kind of hallway fight scene where which I found interesting is like, not only is he just blasting these guys down, but he's got to work his way around this armor. So he's a tactician. So I feel like he knows what he's doing. He knows how to, like, where the weak points are. He was using everything at his disposal, even the weaponry from those guards, like against each other, just playing it off while trying to protect, Grogu, with kind of giving some extra helping hands, if you will. And so it really showed, like you said, it showed his finesse and his ability to get the job done. I kind of had forgotten that. They kind of didn't do a whole lot of like fighting necessarily this season. He was captured a lot, but I kind of forgot this. And then this episode, I was like, oh man, he can still kick butt. Like, this is so cool. And he does it multiple times. He does it almost 3 times, right? So we have when he's being led away, the hallway scene, like you said, and then the final battle within the I almost said throne room, within the little circular conference room there.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, it was, and I think that's something that maybe this is why I like that part so well, is because we haven't gotten to see him really unleashed. As you said, he's a tactician, which I really like seeing him, and how he first became to being enamored or enthralled with this guy in the first place because of his fighting prowess and his ability to. He is a weapon, and he's great with weapons, but he is a weapon too. And then seeing him fight with Grogu, it very much reminded me of Hunter and Omega in season 2 of Bad Batch, where it's like, you know what, I'm not going to worry about protecting you anymore. We're equals. We're going to fight together, but you still got to be careful. I'm still, I still care about you. I don't want anything to happen to you. So you got to be mindful. But they worked together. I love that. I love that a lot. Dennis, what's a one that worked for you?
Well, it's the extension of that scene when Bo-Katan was fighting Moff Gideon, and just her general use of the Darksaber throughout this episode. But more specifically, when Gideon catches her fist and crushes the Darksaber in it. And I thought it was a fitting conclusion to one of the themes of this season, where she realized that the leadership qualities she had were not dependent on that saber. And I think Gideon's line is something like, you Mandalorians are weak without your trinkets. And then her response is, Mandalorians are stronger together. And that's when Din Djarin comes in there and starts shooting at them. And then the 3 of them take on Gideon together. But I'm going to make a lot of people angry. I was really glad to see that the Darksaber is now a thing of the past, or it appears to be a thing of the past, because to quote Monty Python, a lady in a lake distributing swords is no basis for a system of government.
And that's outstanding.
This Darksaber has been causing them nothing but trouble for decades. And it is no way to determine who's going to lead your planet or how your things are going to be run. And now that it's gone, it's a nuisance. It's not going to get in their way anymore.
Oh, I know I had to host a podcast, but I just want to laugh. That was such a great, it's a great bit of pop culture analysis. And I talked about this a little bit too. The notion of being a great warrior, having a great weapon makes you a great leader. That's, that was one of the ways that George Washington got elected, 200 years plus years ago. But yeah, that isn't. I have a lot to say about the Darksaber too, but I'll save that for something else.
Sure. I'll go with one more thing I enjoyed. I really enjoyed the aerial battle of the Mandalorians taking flight against the Dark Troopers in flight. And I thought, man, this is going to be kind of epic. It reminded me of like, if you remember the Mel Gibson film Braveheart, where they're running kind of from the hills into each other, like very much a very kind of epic battle scene. But this was in the air. I mean, like, and it was smooth. I felt like it wasn't like choppy. I didn't feel lost. Like, no, this is how Mandalorians fight. This is it. They own the air, the ground. They're kind of like I said, they're all kind of meant to, do their work. And I felt like these fake Mandalorians, these Dark Troopers wearing Mandalorian armor, they were just kind of dudes with upgrades. Like, they didn't know how to use it necessarily. And here come Mandalorians in just doing their stuff and not getting beat down at all. I feel like they just really over flooded the enemy there, and I feel like it was just like they're loving it. I mean, I think they were ready for battle. They were kind of had appetites for it, and they were ready to fight for their homeworld. So I think that was really cool and epic way to do that, rather than just have them just like do a standoff or something. But I was like, this is really cool way that they put this together. And the way they dropped out and then flew ahead, it was just like, I don't know, it was just really choreographed well and really cool to watch.
I've always liked the idea of jetpacks, but I've never been like a jetpack guy. But this episode made it amazing. It made it so the effects on this are of course terrific, and you would expect nothing less. But I thought that was great. A fun thing that I wouldn't put under epic was R5D4 versus mouse droids. If you would have told me 6 months ago that would be a highlight for the finale, I probably would have been disturbed if that was a highlight. But it was a highlight. It was great. The fact that these mouse droids, and I actually, for some silly reason, was thinking recently, what is the point of a mouse droid? Like, are there lots of mice that they have a problem? Are they cleaning? What is the deal with these things besides just a fun little gimmick in A New Hope with Chewbacca roaring at one? But the fact that they come out and also they have little sirens on, and they're like rotating around R5D4, and then he does his best R2D2 impression from Revenge of the Sith. I was thinking down there the fact of how he and the Mandalorian communicate, even though Mando doesn't speak binary. I found that to be a really refreshing bit of comedic relief, which is obviously needed because there's some heavier things going on. But it's still a fun highlight.
Oh yeah, and how far has he come with droids? Because back in season 1, he didn't want to work with IG-11, shot him in the head, and now he was trying to get him rebuilt, and then had to settle for R5D4, and then it was, good job, buddy. They one big happy family.
Yeah, it was pretty good. Are there other key moments that stand out? I think the fight sequence, those Praetorian guards are just still such a spectacle, and I love that it's very operatic when they come out. And I think this is why Jon Favreau is such a good storyteller, and Dave, of course, as well, is at the end of the last one, the way those things killed Paz Vizsla, we already knew they were a threat, but they were really a threat. But then they're all taking on Grogu by himself. And even though I called this episode adequate, that sequence was, that had me scared. I mean, did I think Grogu was going to die?
Yeah.
No, I wouldn't say that. But I will say I felt legitimate peril for him. And then when Mando was going to fight him, that part I was excited. I'm like, okay, he's mad because they're hurting his son. And then we've finally gotten a refresher that he is a bad Bama Jamma. Like, he is a tough dude. And so getting to see him fight them and the way that he and Grogu work together, and also that they allowed Grogu to have some limits with the Force. Me, to my way of thinking, fully acknowledging that your natural abilities and inclinations are great, and you did learn under Luke for an undisclosed amount of time. We'll look at the Star Wars Timelines book, and it might shed some light for you. I felt that worked. Like, if he was suddenly overpowered, that wouldn't have landed as well. But I thought it was wisely done and well presented story wise.
Yeah, my favorite part about that sequence was when he kept taking the weapons away, like pushing them out of reach. I was like, that's smart. I mean, like, that wasn't overpowered. It was just more about he was using that to his advantage and making sure that it seems right. It seems like what a helper kid would do, as if helping his dad out in a fight. I thought it was really a smart way to do that, like you said. And then at the end, where he deflects the flames in the force bubble, I thought that felt appropriate too. I didn't feel like it was overkill. I felt like he had done that. I think season 1, right,
yes,
during the blast that went all the way up.
Yep.
So again, it's in line with his kind of level set. I didn't feel like he was doing anything he didn't normally do, and the jumps and twirls and stuff was kind of fun. He's giggling the whole time, so that was a lot of fun to see.
Until he fell down and that thing pinned him. Because then all of a sudden it switched like, oh no, like he's not having fun anymore. Yeah. Dennis, you were going to jump in on that?
No, Cory pretty much covered that. I was just going to make a comment that, again, the strength of his abilities was appropriate. He wasn't displaying any new fantastic force powers that we hadn't seen before.
Right.
Nothing that Luke possibly wouldn't have shown him whenever he spent time with there. It was all of an evolution of what we saw before. And they could have easily gone with a gimmick where he did something crazy to resolve all this. And they didn't. They went a little bit reserved and let the teamwork play out between Bo, Din, and Grogu there. And I like that.
What other highlights do you all want to bring up? Because I want to get to the other side of the coin too, and offer some different perspectives. But I want to talk about the other things too, because again, it was a really fun. Like Mason and I had a really fun time. I was very much nervous the entire episode because I felt like there was nice amounts of peril and cost and risk that were sprinkled throughout this thing. What about?
Well, I was going to say the conclusion there on Mandalore when they were back in the mines with the living waters, and then they were in the Great Forge, and they relit the forge, and then the Mandalorians were all there, and banging their gauntlets together and doing that for Mandalore, and that really struck a tone with. It gave me chills. It was kind of the retaking Camelot, the end, the return of the king, where they're settling back into Gondor. Same type of a feeling. My 15-year-old jumped off the couch when he saw that. He was so excited.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. And so I really like that. I think the conclusion of this, Cory was pointing out where this was a satisfying conclusion for Din and Grogu's story. If we never got another moment of them, this would have been a great place to leave them. But what they did there on Mandalore, I don't want to call it world building because it was the end of the season, so we're not really doing any more world building at this point. But it opened up possibilities, and it really it was a nice redemption for Mandalore after everything we saw in the Clone Wars and then the previous couple seasons.
Yeah, I think that's really truthful as far as that goes. It does. You said world building. I think it's kind of story building to me. It's the next chapter, if you will. I think it's a nice way to put it. I did like that also, the fact that Din Djarin adopts Grogu in that moment. I kind of always expected that, I guess. I wasn't kind of unwritten. Now it's official, I guess. But that was a really great moment to show that, like, hey, not all Mandalorians are, by blood or by trade or whatever. It was more of, hey, we can still adopt people into this culture and live as one. And that was we saw that a couple episodes back when all the kind of different clans came together and kind of cemented there as like, okay, everybody's accepted this child into the fold, and he's now his son by adoption.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a really cool moment. It really brings their relationship together and fosters a father-son mentality. That's always kind of been there, I guess. But like, I feel like, okay, now it's official, and he has a new name, Din Grogu. Don't know how that works. I guess it's like the reverse of his surname. But, just roll with it, I guess, and we'll see what happens.
So I do know about that. That's a very mythological construct. Okay. Back in long the days of Beowulf, which is one of the oldest narratives ever recorded, everyone is identified as a warrior or as a soldier or whatever, as a person, because family is very important and sacred, especially in ancient culture, and it is now. But you would adopt the surname, yes, but the surname always came first. So when they said Din Grogu, I'm like, that's a cool little archetype of mythology that they're using. And so then we realized that Din Djarin's his actual first name, and Din is his family name. So Din Grogu works from a mythological perspective because you take on the surname as the first name, and then your second name is your what we would call our first name. So I would be Zaire Dan, you would be Keith Lee Dennis, you would be Clubb Cory, and then your sons would be Clubb Wesley, for example.
Okay, so then Bo-Katan is,
apparently Bo is the, if we're going, if her family goes by the same culture or custom, we've established that Mandalore has separate sort of cultures and customs within their own planet, right? So that's how that works.
Yeah, I've been struggling with that
Oh.
all day because it is Bo-Katan Kryze, Satine Kryze, Paz Vizsla, Pre Vizsla.
Well, the only thing
And-
I make sense with that is since he's a child of the Watch, they have their own thing.
Yeah.
That's what I wondered
and
too.
The other only conversation I got into this is it didn't make sense that Mandalorians didn't take off their helmets back in season 1, so we may get an explanation from this someday that resolves all of it.
This is Vanessa Marshall, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi.
What I want to talk about is the things that caused me to rank this as adequate, and I want to see if you all can sort of shed some light for me, or tell me sort of how it affected you. And the first thing I guess I want to talk about is that let's talk about the Darksaber. Dennis brought the Darksaber. I liked your take. I found an alternate take. I was bothered by this. And not just because it's my favorite legacy lightsaber. That to me, the Darksaber, it's been in Star Wars for what, 15 years, 20 years, whenever it showed up on Clone Wars. In the context of the mythology, it's been around for thousands of years. There's only one that's been made. And now that it's destroyed, I do like the idea, and you said it perfectly, Dennis, the fact that she says, no, Mandalorians are stronger together. She has long suspended that idea that I can only be a leader if I have this weapon, if I have this magical ancient talisman, the sacred talisman. So she was already there. So did we need to destroy it? Besides showing that Moff Gideon is really strong because he's got his Iron Man level strength armor on, and that's why he was able to crush it. I mean, for him, it's symbolic of, I'm crushing your trinkets, as you said, Dennis. I'm crushing your dreams. You're nothing without it. I've already tricked you to surrendering before, so now I'm just going to beat you. You don't have your little special little weapon that I actually coveted, and now I don't want it because I'm better.
Yeah.
But it's sort of like, well, why did I spend all this time thinking this was so important? If you really crushed it because it's just a symbol, Bo-Katan already learned that before it was crushed. So
Yeah.
Was that an extra step that was necessarily needed story-wise?
Yes.
For me, I think
It
not.
was.
And for all we know, Luke can come in later and be like, boop, or so come over, beep. Oh, here's the forge fix. But I felt like that was a bridge too far when she already learned those lessons.
So I appreciate your take on that because that's really interesting. And the minute it did get crushed, I knew that would not have broken her. Right. So let's think about a Bo-Katan who was previously, episode 1, right? She has the Darksaber, let's say. It gets crushed. She would be crushed. She would be like, I can't do this anymore. She would be done. But she's learned so much through this season that she doesn't need the Darksaber alone to do this. And this cemented it. This cemented her in her doubt. It cemented her in her belief that she is now, the true leader, and she doesn't need a trinket, if you will. To rule over these people or lead them. I shouldn't say rule, lead them. And I think it was fitting. I think it was nice to have to take that old way and crush it. And that's literally what they had to do. I think that's the way it was done. Dennis?
Well, and to the comment you were making earlier, Cory, about how your kids point out that this was like an episode that got cut in half and became a two-parter.
Mm-hmm.
If this had been one entire episode and not long before the Darksaber got crushed, we had that exchange between Din Djarin and Bo-Katan where she was expressing her doubt and her ability to lead the Mandalorians, that all she has is this Darksaber. When it's followed up by this scene, the Darksaber is getting crushed and she is then stating, we're stronger together. I thought that was very poetic. I thought that was a beautiful partner scene to what we got to see last week.
It was. It absolutely was. And she said that right away. But my problem is that she's already learned that lesson again. Why do we as an audience? Because really for us, why do we have to learn it? Now, if she hadn't gotten there yet and he crushed it and we saw a moment of her being like, oh no, it's all over.
Mm-hmm.
But that emotional goal that she reached for herself was several episodes before this. If it was crushed when she was still in crisis then I think it would have been beautiful. Then the metaphor would have been lovely. But the fact that she already was well past that, and that was just a symbol for us, that to me made it less effective, if that makes sense.
Was it really that many episodes ago, though? Yeah, I mean, because 2 episodes ago is when she got it back, and
but before she got it back, she was already like, I don't know. I just remember
it was the episode where they went to
when she meets Axe Woves and they
world.
fight. Yeah, it's episode 6 with the Jack Black episode that made everybody scratch their heads or some people smile.
I guess for me, though, it's just that, at the beginning of the season, she was resentful about the Darksaber. And then Axe Woves was telling her that this is something that she had to have just a couple episodes ago. And she still seemed to believe it even in the previous episode, that was all that she had going for her as a leader until Den told her otherwise. And so, and the other thing is, off the screen, we've seen the craziness and the conflict that this Darksaber has. And it goes back to what Axe Woves said. It's like, he's got the Darksaber pointing to Den, and he's not even a full-blooded Mandalorian. He doesn't have an ounce of Mandalorian blood. And so it was something that the people are getting hung up on. And now it's not getting in the way of their culture anymore. They really can be stronger together. So I don't know. I'm being a little redundant with that, but
no, I love it. And I appreciate that.
My draw is, I think the minute they have that little scene on the front of the ship there, Bo-Katan and Din Djarin, where he says, "I'm behind you 100%," or whatever he says. Your song isn't written yet.
Yeah, that's
like that's when the saber was crushed, metaphorically, right?
Yeah.
And then there she realized, oh, you're right. Now, in physically, it's been crushed now because of Moff Gideon. But like, I think she was still holding on to that. To your point, Dan, you're totally right. At that moment, it was like relief for her to just, now I can just use it as a weapon, or I can use it to my advantage, whatever the case is. Yes, it is kind of leading the people, but I'll just use it to fight, and so I think that was the final blow for that one.
Because she leads him in the battle, the sequence you brought up at the beginning, and she's slicing through people, which was really cool. Yeah. And so, I guess maybe this helps explain it. At the end of 6, when she does get it back, and the Mando's like, well, technically it is hers because I was, captured, and she rescued me and killed my captor, and so I got it back. When she holds it aloft, I guess in that moment, the way I interpret it was she used that as a symbol to unite both clans, like was always intended by the Armorer, and what Bo-Katan learned to feel about herself. But I think in that moment, that was more about the symbol of uniting them, and it was the last thing. But I think after that moment, the Darksaber just becomes a really cool mystical weapon. I think after she unites them, she realizes this was the exclamation point, but it didn't do it. I did it because of my commitment to my people and because of me bringing them together. So that's why even at 6, I feel like she already learned that lesson. I know I'm belaboring the point, but I don't know. It just didn't.
It's important though.
Yeah.
Well, no, I get what you're saying. It's just, she had to learn that, I think. And then I guess as fans, we had to see it get crushed just to say like, okay, this is the end of it. We don't know. There's never going to be a future, battle for the saber, issue. It's squashed. We're writing this one out. I hope it stays squashed. Because I think that was something we saw with Luke's lightsaber, right? Or Vader's lightsaber, right? So it's like, I feel like that was carried through when Luke used it and then Rey used it. It was like, that same idea. It's like, okay, it was broken half for a while.
I see. When that came back in Rise of Skywalker, I'm like, really? We just got a bunch of Star Wars duct tape? Really?
Well, that's bad story writing. But I think they're trying to say that this part of it is squashed.
Yeah, Mandalorian has a habit of destroying our favorite Star Wars toys. First it was the Razor Crest, and now the Darksaber.
That's right. All we needed was a HasLab Darksaber.
Yeah. We're going to get a HasLab backpack next.
All right, let's shift to another big reveal. This was a big one, and this has been talked about since the first episode titled The Mandalorian, back when the series first came out. We learn now Moff Gideon's endgame. Let's talk about it and what we thought about how that was explained and resolved. I'll let either of you jump out first. I'm going to be the party pooper, just so you know.
Sure. I kind of had this feeling in the back of my head when we first saw him walk through that galley, and I thought, oh, I wonder what's in there. And he alluded to the fact that that's not my thing, it's your thing, and he's more like ha ha, mustache twitching villain, which he plays up great. I think it's fantastic, but I didn't think it was too outside the bounds of him. He's always trying every angle. We saw out that he was looking to use the best tools from the Mandalorians, the Force from the Jedi, the power of the Empire. So he's trying to gather all these things. He's like taking all the toys and going home, and trying to one up everybody. He just has his own plan. He doesn't want to follow anybody else's plan. So it's Gideon's way or the highway. And obviously would clone himself. He's full of himself. He's such a egotistical guy. So obviously this is right up his alley. Did I love it? It was fine. I mean, it makes kind of some sense, but
what
I
would
was more
you
upset
have,
about the fact that
if you got to decide it, what would you have done with that?
for him choosing to make clones himself.
Yeah, would you have had him clone himself? And I agree that like it fits him. He's a sociopath.
So
he's completely obsessed with himself. So that completely tracks. But what would you have done that, or would you have tried something else?
If I was Gideon, I would do that. I would totally clone myself because there's always one of me. And if I could be more of me outside the galaxy, ruling at every position head, I don't have to worry about, the lieutenant or the figureheads making the choices. It's me always making those choices, and I trust me the most. He's also a coward. He doesn't want to. He fights, but he cowers when he knows he's been beaten. So I feel like it's one of those moves where he's like, well, if I can't do it, well, my clones will do it. Like I'll always, run and hide, and I feel like that's part of his nature. I think he totally would do that. If I was writing it out, he would do that because he's so egotistical that way.
So as Cory Clubb, the acclaimed screenwriter, you would have done the same thing.
Well, I mean, we're dipping our toes in the clones again, right? I mean, I think it's one of those things where he's looking for every advantage because he's not confident in himself. He's a coward, so he wants to look for other ways people are having success. The Mandalorians are having success with their armor. The Jedi are having success with their Force. The Empire is having success with their clones, if you will. So now he's like, I'm just going to do all that crap. I'm going to just copy and paste. He's like, he's the kid that came to school and didn't do his homework. He's like, let me copy your answers for the test, whatever. So he's that guy.
And then 3 redheads show up behind him just in case, like the Praetorians. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Here comes Ryder Waldron. Look out. All right. Dennis, what about you?
I enjoyed the story. And I think one of the reasons I enjoyed it is he starts off as this Imperial warlord that we meet in season 1, and he's got an interest for the child. We don't know what it is. And then they left enough breadcrumbs for us to follow over the course of the next 2 seasons that suggested one thing, that was going to be some sort of Snoke or Emperor Palpatine type revelation, because that's what we know the end game of the sequel trilogy is. But then he pulls something else out. But then when you go back and you looked at some of the breadcrumbs that came before, his meeting with the Shadow Council and denying that he was interested in cloning when he really was. So there was something he had to hide then. And then even that line that escaped my scrutiny from the previous episode, where he was trying to combine the best of cultures, the Jedi, the cloners, the Mandalorians, and to make something great, still didn't pick up on that. And then, but as soon as we got into that chamber this week, I was like, oh, those clones are about ready to go. And then it came obvious real quick that he was doing himself. I liked it. I liked his narcissism in that moment, that, he's the guy for the job, that this is what he's going to do to make the superior person. The one thing he didn't have, he declares, is the Force. And, and then Din Djarin snuffs this out, takes this away, and makes him so angry about it that he was just there on the precipice of his victory, and Din snatched it away from him. So it worked for me when it comes down to it, and I was fine with it. I'm actually glad we didn't get to see a whole bunch of Moff Gideons running around. That didn't put an end to that at the end.
Yes.
But I like the way it all played out.
I love both of your explanations, and I will say I too liked it. I liked it. I thought it was fine. thought it was a little paint by numbers. I thought it wasn't predictable until I saw it, and I was like, oh. I will say that was the moment. Usually there's a moment about 15, 20 minutes in when I have to pause the episode to heat up my coffee again because I'm slowly sipping while I'm watching the show. And I paused it right when they show the clones. And I said, Mason, who do you think that is? He goes, I don't know. I don't want to look. I'm like, that's my boy. And then I just looked at it and I'm like, oh no, is that Mace Windu? Because they didn't have hair. And I thought, oh geez, Mace Windu's coming back. And I was like, oh boy. So then I heated up my coffee, went downstairs, unpaused it, and then and the eyes opened up. It was a great little sort of a jump scare horror thing. And I'm like, oh, he's cloning himself. And then I sort of paused on it. So all this stuff from the very, very beginning, when we first meet him in chapter 7, and long live the Empire, and you've got something I want, and in his bloodthirsty, relentless search for Grogu, it was so he could clone himself. It was all an ego thing.
Ego trip, yeah.
I was a little disappointed in that. I thought that was a little quaint. It just, I don't know. Here's my problem. For me, and I know a lot of you probably feel the same way, Star Wars is like the best pizza you could ever have. It's just great. You love it. There's other stuff that's good, but my gosh, is there anything better than a really well-made pizza? The crust, the cheese, the tomato sauce, the toppings. And then you think you're going to your favorite pizza shop and you get a frozen pizza. Now it's fine. It's fine. You know, it'll still please your appetite. But at the end of the day, you know that it can be better. I'm not a fan who needs all the strings unraveled or tied up in a nice little bow, or however you want to extend that metaphor that I poorly did just now. That's fine. I feel like that kind of I found him a little less daunting and intimidating when he really just wants to clone himself and dress up like a Mandalorian and just run around and cackle. Like, he became so one-dimensional and unappealing to me when that happened. And I wish I didn't feel that way. And let's be really, really clear on this. Do I think I could do better? Absolutely not. There's no way I could do even a fraction as good as any of the geniuses who make this show. But I love it so much, and I felt like that was a little uninspired for me.
So here's what I've got for you, Dan. This pizza might have been a frozen pizza. You know what? But it meant to be, because he's a cardboard dude. He's gonna be the Muhat mustache twitching dude that does things wrong and wants everything right. He's gonna make mistakes. He's gonna be a coward. That's the way he's written. The guy who is that perfect pizza, that topping, that smell you smell when you walk in, that's Thrawn. He's the one that's baking in the oven.
Well, that's true.
But it's Thrawn. We got a taste of him in the last episode. They mentioned his name. He says, "Oh, where's he out of hiding?" Well, he's still in the oven, buddy. He's waiting. He's coming out pretty soon. So I think they're prepping it. They don't want to necessarily have anything to stand in his way. And I think they just said, "Okay, we're going to make him super kind of cookie cutter." But
he wasn't like that until this point. Do you agree with that? Like, I always found him interesting and cool and fascinating, but then he suddenly became a very one-dimensional, even for a Star Wars villain. And I was like, oh, really? Why did I invest in him? And Giancarlo Stanton is
I think that he was supposed to be that way. That's the way it was supposed to be. And so, I mean,
I'm sure you're right. And, it's my own problem. Expectation without regulation equals fan constipation. Yeah.
Well, now you've explained it that way, Dan, I kind of see your point. I guess when we first met him at the end of season 1 and over the course of season 2, it very much was him talking to his underlings, long live the Empire. And so he was kind of stoking that patriotic, I don't want to use that word, but you know what I mean? Patriotic fever with these Imperials along the way. But then it all proved to be a ruse because he's doing it for himself. I guess the way I reconcile that is that, in this previous episode to all this, we got to see him with the Shadow Council, and there's maybe one or two true believers in the Empire there, and that was Pelion and Brendel Hux sitting there on the council. Everybody else was talking about their profitability with raiding space lanes and how that's working for them. as these warlords. And then it was in Gideon's own best interest to downplay Thrawn. He's not here. When's he coming back? You said he's going to be coming. And so for me, it works that he's been fooling everybody for his own selfish gain. And he took us in as the viewer as well. And so we got that reveal. But I appreciate your explanation, because I was not getting it there for the moment, but that makes sense the way you laid it out.
Good. Well, I'm glad. I appreciate you both letting me sort of, I don't know. I wish I didn't feel that way. I really do. Let's talk about, yeah, well, good. I'm glad. I was just thinking of that. Maybe it's because I'm hungry. The other thing, let's talk about the end. Din Djarin suddenly adopts Grogu. It becomes Din Grogu. They have this beautiful ceremony. There's like a sort of a baptism, really. And we say, is his name Ragnarok, or what's his name?
Ragnar,
yes. Similar to Ragnarok. And he becomes official. I really thought Grogu was going to say his first words, but he didn't. And then Din says, I'm going to adopt him. They go back to, she says, all right, well, you better go do some adventures. And he leaves, and they go to Navarro, and he's got this little hut. And then the cinematography is really nice, and it zooms in and becomes a little circle. And it zooms in on just like you're cropping a picture to try to get rid of that person that photobombed you. And you're putting Din Djarin and Grogu there, and he's levitating those little frog things from the Book of Boba Fett. And then it ends. Tell me what you all thought about the end.
Well, I kind of said a little bit about this earlier, but it's if we never got another moment of them, this was a nice way to end their story, because there was a journey for Din over the course of these 3 seasons where he started off as a bounty hunter. Now he's still a bounty hunter, but he's found his place in this Mandalorian culture. He's just talked to Captain Teva about how he's going to be more discreet, or use more discretion, I should say, with picking his missions. And he's raising an adopted son and an apprentice. And so I think it fits in very well with the themes of Star Wars that we got in the found family. But I liked it. It worked for me.
Cool. Mr. Clubb Cory.
Yeah, I agree with you, Dennis. I like Clubb Cory. I like that you said this kind of puts a bow on in a package. If we don't see these characters again, then I'm satisfied. I feel like, okay, there was a wrap up. But I think we'll see more of them. I think that's definitely just a pause, if you will, in the game, a save point, if you will, and being able to let them sit there until we come back around. It's interesting to see where, if you remember in season 1, I think it was, when they're at that little village farm, and that
sanctuary is what it's called.
The sanctuary. Okay. The woman says something like, "Oh, we got a place for you here. You can settle down." And he says something like, "That would be nice. I would like that," And that kind of made me thought in my head. I was like, "Oh, is he longing for that? Is he looking for that?" And now he has this apprentice, and now it's his son. Adopted son now. So does he feel fulfilled? And now he's like has a new path in life. Maybe he was struggling with that beforehand. He didn't know what to do. He was kind of aimlessly going from bounty to bounty. Now he has a reason to keep moving. He's the Mandalorians are back, and he we can go back to his path again, and being able to raise Grogu, go on more adventures. And he mentions I guess the armorer mentions that, do as your person did for you. And I wondered who that was. Who was his mentor?
Your mentor did for you. Yeah, and they don't bring this. Hopefully that'll be a continuous.
So that'd be kind of interesting. I'd like to hear more about that.
Mm-hmm.
They did kind of linger a little bit on his parents, meeting Grogu's parents. And I thought, oh no, we're not going to go seek the parents out now next, are we? To get the blessing. I thought that for sure was going to be like a little wink to the camera, but I was like, okay, they passed that over pretty quickly. So, no, I'm satisfied with the ending. I think it was really sweet. There at the little shack, Mando, and I feel like he is at peace. I feel like he is at peace, and maybe he was conflicted up until then. So, really nice closeout to this season.
It It was nice. When I was over, I felt warm and happy inside, and I'm not being silly. Mason liked it. I had a really good feeling on the way to school, and then I started thinking about it, which is always dangerous. And I came up with the same question that I've been talking about throughout this entire season. What did we learn as fans and consumers about the Mandalorian and Grogu as characters in this season? How did they learn? How did they grow? How did they change? And I can honestly say they didn't. This is their show, and they didn't change or grow at all. And that's, to me, and this is just my pretentious English teacher hat, so I apologize in advance. Seasons 1 and 2, I felt like the Mandalorian was pretty a well-rounded character. He was much more dynamic than many characters in popular culture. This notion of grasping with identity, and then changing your whole loyalty and your focus to suddenly care for this child, and then to eventually take it on as your own, and then to love so much you will spend your time going across the galaxy, not only protecting this child, but finding its place so they can grow and spread its wings and be what it is meant to be, what Grogu is meant to be. And then this season is just about him helping Bo-Katan. I mean, what the great thing about Din Djarin is that Tom and I talked about this a lot at school actually today. The great thing about him is that he doesn't forget anything. So if someone needs something, or like him repurposing IG-11 and giving Grief Karga a Marshal, right? Him helping the Mandalorians unite, him promising, I'm going to stay with you, Lady Kryze, until your song is sung. He does everything that he says he will do. He is the ultimate person of his word. And I love that about him. It's just in season 3, he was just sort of relegated to a side character. And it's a little ironic because I know some people didn't like when he showed up in the Book of Boba Fett, and suddenly Boba Fett was a side character in his own series. And I respect the frustration there. That's not necessarily a terrible thing at all. I think for me at the end, he's sitting on that in front of that little hut, and Grogu was doing his thing in that circle. It was just a little too cute. It was a little too like, this is how you are supposed to feel, audience. I didn't feel like I was being presented this beautiful narrative. I felt like I was being told, this is how we want you to think. We want you to be warm and fuzzy. And maybe the problem is that the finale of season 1 and of season 2 were so good. They're still so good. Now, I didn't need Luke Skywalker to show up. I didn't need some crazy twist. I didn't need some, random stock character to show up to complete it. And I didn't need it to be like seasons 1 and 2, but I just don't know why did this story need to be told? That's, you guys know me. I've always said, whatever the story is, how many sequels you give, as long as the story needs to be told, then I'm in. But if it's just there, I don't know. This was cold pizza for me. It was cute, it was charming, but I don't know. It just felt
so. If this season had not been called Mandalorian Season 3, but was the Book of Bo-Katan or Novel of the Night Owls, would you have been more satisfied?
Yes.
Good question.
Yes.
That's a conversation my wife and I have had about this season of the
Does you guys feel the same way?
Not as passionately as you do about it. And I guess I've just kind of taken a look at these 3 seasons of The Mandalorian and the Book of Boba Fett, and I see it as a story and side stories, and we're bringing in characters. I was fine because someone did have a character arc, and that was Bo-Katan in this. And so I can excuse, and it works for me that Din Djarin didn't have his own with Grogu. I think, as an aside to that conversation, what I did like about this end is that they've been on the run and now they found peace.
I agree.
They're not being pursued by Moff Gideon anymore, so they can afford to settle down in one spot. And they don't have a bounties hunter guild after them, and they don't have half the galaxy wanting to know where they are. They're not having to make decisions about whether or not to spend time with Luke or whether they're going to be a family. Does that make a character?
Mhm.
No, not really. But again, I understand what you're saying, Dan, and I think a lot of people feel that way. If it had been called something else, the book Bo-Katan, for instance, then that criticism wouldn't be as loud.
I also don't love the fact that at the end of all this stuff and all this stuff with the armor, all of a sudden she's like, well, you better go. And she's basically, if he was out on the front porch, she'd chase him with a broom. Like, well, you better go off and do your adventures. So he spent his whole life trying to fit in, and he helped to resurrect Mandalore, and he united the people, and he was with Bo-Katan, and they're like, all right, see ya. And he leaves. And the only way that works for me is if he really was doing all this in service to Bo-Katan. And then we return to the idea that seasons 1 and 2 are really about, yeah, I care about my people, but I'm taking my helmet off because it's for Grogu. It's for this child. It's for this person who has become like my son. And then it seemed like he abandoned those ways for all of season 3 to help Mandalore. And he's like, I'm out. I'm going to go be a dad again. I like that. If he's that so focused and loyal, I can work with that. I still, I don't know. It's not worth getting super worked up about, so I'm not. Yeah. But I knew I was with friends, so I knew I could share these things.
No, you bring a good point, because I think even for my fandom, this is
because you love Mando. You love him.
I do love Mando. This is the point for me as a Mando fan, even and a Star Wars fan, that I can come up for air. I don't have to worry about the next threat linking off in the wild. Like, yes, it's out there. I'm sure it's coming. But like, I can go, okay, I can kind of close the book on this chapter for now, put my bookmark in there, and know we left on good terms. And like you said, if this wraps things up, then it feels okay. But I think, though, and this is going to continue to go. We know that Ahsoka's series is coming. We know all those things are going to happen. We know that we've talked about that Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau have written a season 4 for Mandalorian, and we know there's a film coming based around Mandalore for Dave Filoni. So we know more things are coming. And I guess to your point, Dan, you said it well. I don't want this season to be just arc building or I guess a filler for the bigger thing. And I think you have to get there somehow, but spread on a little bit of muhaha or something else is lurking out there that we still are unknown about, and I want to see something else that's still lingering, maybe that would thread us into the next thing. But maybe that's just for coming from like a Marvel background where you wait for that end credits scene. I did wait for the credits scene, waiting for something to come out of the darkness, and nothing happened. And I thought, okay, well, what is going to happen next? Do I need to be focused on this or not? Do I even care about season 4? At this point,
right?
Yes, I'm excited, but maybe I don't need to care. Maybe it's all wrapped up. But then again, a lot of that's unwritten. I think a lot of that is not necessarily for sure yet. And that's the hard part about being on the internet and being social media. It's like, I feel like there's a lot of things out there that the studios have to give us to keep us invested.
Yeah.
So like, oh wait, don't worry. This might be the close of this chapter, but there's more coming. So I feel like they could have done better, knowing what the atmosphere and the climate is of fandom.
Right. If there's a story that is worth telling, then I'm here. But if it's not worth telling to the level, and they maybe in many ways they're just a victim of their own awesomeness, their own glorious. Because those first 2 seasons of The Mandalorian are absolute, they're almost perfection. They're just great. They're great. And this season was good, really good. But I want Mando to be great, and maybe that's just, I don't know. I guess it doesn't.
See, for me, it was a donut of greatness. I thought the beginning and the end, it was really, really great. The middle, maybe a little left a little to be desired in this. But this season has had a bit of a title problem, and not just the calling it the Mandalorian and then really featuring Bo-Katan. And I love that character. I think she's fantastic. But the other thing is, in the previous episode, it was called The Spies. And there was one spy that was easy to identify on screen. And so we all were wondering who the other spy was to cause the plural in spies. And no other spy showed up in this. And so I did get a little annoyed with that because I kept expecting at some point in this episode there was going to be some sort of reveal that somebody was betraying them, because why else would you have called the previous chapter what you did? And I don't appreciate that type of manipulation.
Did you hear my explanation for it last week that I got from Blake Weaver? He said in the book of Numbers in the Old Testament, some Israelites go into, I believe, into Jerusalem, and they're known as spies going back into the place where their people used to belong and used to live.
That's deep. Okay.
Yeah. So from that, hopefully that gives you a little bit of peace, because I think, and I feel like that is Jon Favreau's background as well. So that's never been officially stated that I know of, but that, to me, that works a lot.
It does work, but it's after the fact. And the problem is when you tell me up front the name of the episode is The Spies, and then show me one, and then don't show a literal definition of a spy, and then don't show me another one. It was something that was left over coming into this episode. And so I am a subscriber to the theory about not necessarily speculating on what you're going to get out of an episode, but I feel like we were being told what was going to come, and then it didn't. And so that was a little bit of a nice. Now, I will say I'm glad that the Armor or Axwos or none of those people ended up betraying everybody else, but I think it created a lot of unnecessary conversation and for no real purpose.
I was glad I kept waiting for the Armor to turn bad because of our conversation last week, and I was glad that the Armor didn't. But the fact that the Armor was kept on the sidelines for so long, unless that was done to keep us like waiting for something happening, making us nervous. Otherwise, you just kind of relegated to not doing a bunch.
You bring up some good points about the last episode, obviously, of spies, and I would expect this series to be very more like, you've brought a lot of casual Star Wars fans into understanding this series and Disney Plus and the way it has been marketed. You've had a lot of casual people pick up with Star Wars with this, I think. So then they name it something very kind of, unique, and it doesn't fit the branding to me. Let's be a little more on the nose, or let's just be a little more, in the way that's like in our face, so that we like not necessarily tripping over ourselves. Maybe that's the point. Maybe that's the point, is just to speculate and just throw us out of left field. One thing I guess I'll say was a low light for me. They went back to the baptism scene of Ragnar or whoever, and I felt like, okay, did we get to the point where that still a traditional thing to do, or we had some Mandalorians that had their helmets off that were watching, and I thought, are these tribes trying to combine into one, or are we just kind of representing everybody, just come as you are and do your own thing? Because I felt like maybe they kind of, she said maybe that wasn't necessarily the path anymore, but she still says this is the way. And I wanted, I guess as a fan, I wanted them to kind of come together and find a new mantra that felt like, we are the Mandalorians or something, or whatever the case is. We were stronger together. And then I felt like that would have been like, oh, that would have been really cool. I think they've set their differences aside, but yet we still get this baptism scene where he's in the waters and they're still kind of returning to the old ways of things. And I don't know where that kind of stands for me, for them.
Dennis?
Well, the one difference is that when she was having him take that vow, she didn't include the part about not taking off his helmet this time around.
Good catch.
Oh, that's true. Good catch.
So I'm wondering if
maybe
there
there is a
is,
change.
because she did talk about a couple episodes when she sent Bo on that mission, a new age. And so, she can walk both paths. So maybe that's the chase. Because I was wondering why they were going through that process again, because I got interrupted by the dinosaur turtle, whatever it was they called all those episodes ago, but it was otherwise complete then. But
I took that as we've gone out of our way to show, and Grogu puts a stop to this as IG-12. We're gonna have different beliefs, but we're still the same. To me, I try to. It's not a metaphor, but I try to explain to my students. In Christianity, you've got Catholicism, you've got Protestant, you've got Methodist, you've got all different variations of Christianity, but you still ultimately believe that Jesus is Christ, right? So to me, that's how I was interpreting that, is they are accepting the fact that some of us have different ways of being Mandalorian, but we're not going to step on your toes anymore or try to kill you because you're different than us. So I really like that.
There's different religious aspect to it. I agree with that. We kind of talked about this whole season, like it being very representative of a religion and different paths to take.
Yeah,
and believing they're kind of the same tradition, and so that's really interesting. Yeah, and maybe that's she's kind of not really changing her ways, but more of like including the others to be part of the collective group.
And that special
infighting, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly.
As an aside, one of the things that I really appreciated about this season was the way they developed the armor over the course of the season. When we first met her, we knew her as kind of this leader of this branch of the Children of the Watch, and we knew Death Watch was up to no good because what happened in the Clone Wars. And so there was always this suspicion around her and all these random decisions she was making and all these instructions she was giving to people. But she almost employed some sort of a Socratic method a lot of the time with everybody and saying, well, you can't do this because he can't talk. Well, if his parents gave permission, then we get this right. Yeah, but his parents are far away. Well, then I'll adopt him. And then you could almost see her smirking behind the helmet. This is the way. And she brings everyone around to the point like all my law school professors ever did without ever telling you the answer. She leads you to it. And it's that knowledge that when you make that conclusion yourself will stick with you and bring you to a better understanding of whatever the lesson is you're supposed to learn, the philosophy you're supposed to embrace, than if someone had just told you straight out. And I really like that methodology.
And I think that sums up beautifully why I struggled a bit with the end. I was told this is how it ends. I love the end of season 2. For all we knew at the end of season 2, Grogu and Mando would never see each other again. Grogu, how long is going to be with Luke? Where's he going to go? But now we know. It's all. I mean, how many Star Wars stories can you think of where at the end it's all wrapped up perfectly? Return of the Jedi, when they thought the whole story was actually over. That was it. And maybe that's part of it. I don't want it to be over. I also don't want this episode to be over, but if we talk anymore, I'm going to set the record for the longest Coffee with Kenobi podcast. So let's wrap up. Let's wrap up. Any last minute thoughts or ideas that either of you want to share as we close out?
No, well, despite the criticisms, I enjoyed the episode. I think it was a fantastic finale, and I hope we get a 4th season of The Mandalorian.
Cory?
Yeah, I think this is probably, like you said, the weakest of the 3 seasons. But I still enjoyed it. I mean, I still sat down every Wednesday and watched it and gathered the kids around the couch and TV, and we discussed it and talked, and still had that epic feel of must-see TV. So I still think it's got a lot going for it. I'm excited, like you said, for season 4, if that's a possibility, and then where John and Dave will take these characters to the future. So I definitely think there's more stories to be told. And we're just here along for the ride. So I'm excited to see what's next.
Listening to Coffee with Kenobi, you are, with Dan Z, the podcast you're looking for. This is...
I really enjoyed it. I thought it was fun. I've been pretty clear about it. So people, I think sometimes, usually not many people I talk with, but some people misunderstand, criticism for being critiquing or being negative. None of my stuff that I'm saying to my way of thinking is negative. It's just like some things don't always land perfectly, and they don't have to.
Yeah.
That's okay. It's the conversation. It's the discourse. It's learning other points of view, like the two of you fine fellows. That helps me to appreciate things in a different way. So I'm very, very grateful for that. Definitely grateful for the both of you. Let's give our letter grades on the episode, Cory.
I started with a higher grade, but just through our conversation, it helped me identify some things that maybe were a little weaker for this episode. So I did downgrade a little bit just through a conversation. I tend to do that when we talk about things. I'll come in with a grade I have, and then the conversation seems to
ruin it.
Up it.
Yes.
No, he didn't really. It just wasn't as strong as I thought initially. Mm-hmm. And as we analyze things and, like you said, discuss, that's the whole point of Coffee with Kenobi, was to sit down with a cup of coffee and talk. You know, you
that's
have
right.
the ability to say, you know, this didn't really land for me. Here's my thoughts. What do you think? You know, and you know, I think that's a really fair thing to do. I think it's great to have conversations and have those I don't want to say call them conflicts, but yet, you know, those conversations and discussions, because it makes us better fans, I think, just to understand other people's point of view. So I'm giving this episode an A-, but definitely a lot of fun.
Cool. And you also perfectly manifested the entire premise of the show. Nice. You should co-create it or something. Dennis, what about you?
So I'm still buzzing about this episode. I've watched it 3 times.
Wow,
so
that's awesome.
Got up early, watched it over my lunch, and then watched it with my son for dinner. Just him and I at the house tonight. And I've been excited about it all day long, and I was really looking forward to discussing it with you all tonight. I try not to give out A+ unless something is just super incredibly elite on my scale, because I feel like that's a grade that needs to be protected. And so I've been debating today where I was going to land on that. And I think after this conversation, I'm going to put it at a solid A, not quite up to that A+, because yeah, there are a few things that could have been better, but this made the hair on my arm stand up when I watched it earlier today. And I just have been excited about it. And it carried the mantle of that Star Wars excitement for me. And so for that, it earned its A.
That makes me very happy. I the whole season, I've had the best time enjoying this with my son. Our traditions are still intact. We get our breakfast and get ready, and we would talk about it. And when certain key things would happen, even this morning, he and I would look at each other. And for that, I'm forever grateful, because those are just wonderful memories, as you both know, watching it with your kiddos. So I loved that. There was a lot of things that I enjoyed, but I think I was a victim of the success of the previous seasons and my own expectations, which I try exceptionally, obsessively hard to avoid, but sometimes you just can't help yourself. That being said, because of the smiles I had, even though I didn't get a lot of questions and I didn't see a lot of character stuff, I still got a lot of fun out of it. And so I'm going to give it a very, very generous A- as well. So there you have it. Please let us know what you thought about the final episode in Season 3 of The Mandalorian, The Return. And in the meantime, you can certainly listen to Dennis's amazing podcast Stardust, where he and Jay will undoubtedly break this down, as well as other things going on in the world of Star Wars. Dennis, congratulations again on the two of you and your success. It's such a fantastic show and an essential part of Star Wars fandom. Please let everybody know where they can find it and you.
Oh, thanks. That was very kind. Yeah, you can find Podcast Stardust on any podcatcher that you're listening to your podcast on. We're available pretty much everywhere, and if we're not, I'll figure out how to get that taken care of. And then on social media, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, all at Podcast Stardust. Very easy to find. If you want to chat with me, the place that I've been talking Star Wars the most lately is at Podcast Stardust on Twitter. You can find me on Instagram at DJ Keithley, and I put a lot of pictures of running, grilling, and my other hobbies there. And other than that, you can find me on Twitter at DJKVER2.
Excellent. And Cory, one more time for the people in the back, let us know where we can find you.
Well, Dan, I want to thank you for allowing me to come on board this whole season as a guest. A couple other than a few times I missed, but thanks for allowing me to break these episodes down and jabber and talk and explore and have some fun. So it was fun to have the mic turned back on for this season. So I appreciate that. But if you got more thoughts, want to reach out to me, you can do so on Twitter at Cory Clubb. If you've got some comments about this whole season, love to hear those. Or if you've got more to say, feel free to email me, CoryC@coffeewithkenobi.com.
This podcast is not endorsed by the Walt Disney Company or Lucasfilm Limited. It is intended for entertainment and informational purposes only. The official Star Wars website can be found at www.starwars.com. Star Wars, all names, sounds, and any other Star Wars related items are registered trademarks and or copyrights of Disney and their respective trademark and copyright holders. All original content of this podcast is the intellectual property of Coffee with Kenobi unless otherwise indicated.
This is the podcast you're looking for.